welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Many thanks for tuning in. If you haven't done so before, please press subscribe. Over the next week or so, probably going to do a bit of a general look back as to 2017. For people who are new, do a live podcast every Wednesday at 8:30, and next week we may focus out on a look back at some of the action on 2017. I may also do a separate video on it. And as I was looking back at some of the videos I've recorded over 2017 and looking back at some of the fights that have happened, I wanted to re-watch Kell Brook versus Errol Spence. And I've re-watched that fight ahead of making this video. And I personally took something from re-watching it, which is why I'm filming a video here to record to you guys. Now, first and foremost, I would admit that I don't always have the greatest memory. I'm a young guy, but sometimes my memory fails me. And, there's people here, it always amazes me that they can refer back to a fight from a decade ago and remember exactly what happened in the last minute of round 4. I personally can't do that. And there's a phrase that goes around the boxing community. I know Dwyer's fond of it, and I've started using it a bit more on my boxing channel. But the phrase is knockouts cause amnesia. And I think sometimes I can be particularly guilty of falling for that phrase, that knockouts cause amnesia. And Kell Brook versus Errol Spence, as we know, is a fight that ended in Errol Spence winning by knockout. And being completely frank and laying my cards on the table, I have been inclined on several occasions subsequent to that fight to say, for me, Kell Brook's career at the elite is probably over. Or to say things like, I think we've seen the best of Kell Brook. My personal belief was that 2 back-to-back stoppage losses, both of which involved extremely severe facial injuries, and both of which represented very, very tough testing fights for Kell Brook, could well lead to the end of Kell's career. Kell's not a young man anymore. He's now in his 30s. He's got a few miles on the clock. He's taken a few beatings. He's got a few injuries. And I was one of those who maybe thought, we've seen the best of Kell Brook. His best days are behind him. When his recent return was announced, I'll be completely honest and say that I wasn't massively excited. I don't think, Kell Brook's coming back, it's time for him to reign supreme once again. I kind of think, Kell Brook's coming back, maybe he can have 2 or 3 fights and earn a few quid before retiring. So that was kind of my mentality when I was re-watching Kell Brook versus Errol Spence. And I've got to say that re-watching it several months after the event has maybe altered my perspective on things slightly. And acknowledging that part of the reason for that is because knockouts cause amnesia. And maybe when I was remembering the fight, I was remembering, Kell Brook injured and beaten in the last round, as opposed to some of the other stuff that happened in the ring. But watching the fight today, it was an amazingly high-class and competitive fight, at least for the first half, and maybe even a bit further on than that. I rewatched the broadcast that was shown on Sky, and after 6 rounds, the Sky commentary team, who are something of a notorious commentary team, I would concur, I believe had Kell Brook 5 rounds to 1 up. I believe I saw 59 points to 55 in Kell Brook's favour. I looked at my own scorecard from the night, and I believe I had Kell Brook 4-2 up. So, interesting. You kind of forget when you look back on that fight that a large number of people actually had Kell Brook ahead, and considerably ahead, halfway through that matchup. I myself had Kell Brook not only 4-2 up, but I also had Kell Brook, the momentum fighter, the fighter who was doing better in there. I would say, if you watch the first 6 rounds of that fight, and if you try and ignore the fact that you know how that fight ended, and if you just watch the first 6 rounds, after 6, I actually don't think there'd be too many of us who say, I think Errol Spence is going to go on to win this fight. Now, obviously, we know that Errol Spence did go on to win the fight, but my point is that Kell Brook was taking multiple rounds of Errol Spence, in my opinion, in the early rounds. He was building a lead against Errol Spence, and he had momentum. It looked like he would go on to score a victory in that fight, as far as I'm concerned. Now, the fight took a turn for the worse for Kell Brook, and from about round 7 onwards, Errol Spence really started to motor. And I would say 7 onwards, really, it was Errol Spence's fight until he eventually caused the stoppage in his favour towards the end, and Kell Brook saw a stoppage loss for the second time in a row. But it's an interesting piece of evidence and piece of form to look back upon, because Kell Brook and Errol Spence are going to be 2 big fighters in 2017. Kell Brook is making his return at £154 against Sergei Rabchenko. Errol Spence, he's fighting in January actually against Lamont Peterson. Potentially that could be an interesting fight. Who knows what 2018 will have in store for Errol Spence. I hope he'll be more active than he's been recently. But, you know, a lot of big names in that £147 division still. And let's see what matchups he gets thrown into. But this piece of form, this piece of evidence, if you like, that is Brook Spence, was interesting. So to mention a few things that I took from rewatching it. Number 1, size. Errol Spence is a legit beast at 147. We've said time and time again how big Kell Brook is at welterweight. I think Errol Spence is noticeably bigger. And I don't think he's slightly bigger. I think he is a lot bigger. You know, Errol Spence, for me, would actually be a fairly good size light middleweight. If you look at the size difference between Gennady Golovkin and Kell Brook and Errol Spence and Kell Brook, for me it's not easy to say Golovkin is a substantially bigger man than Errol Spence. You know, Errol Spence is a huge unit for 147, and I think he'd still be a unit at 154, being frank. Errol Spence is really good on the inside, and I know we know this. I know this is kind of established, but when I say he's really good, I mean he is elite. Like, he is elite. Some of the stuff he does on the inside, the way he fights, the pressure he brings, the energy and aggression he has at close range is really special. Even in the rounds Kell Brook was winning, and winning well, for me, Errol Spence was taking a lot out of him by how domineering he was on the inside. He kind of had this way, it's almost like dirty boxing, if you like, where he'd almost have an arm up, sort of semi-holding, semi-positioning Kell Brook, and then the other arm would be going in and catching Brook on the body and, you know, up the middle. And he's a force to be reckoned with on the inside. Yeah, cast your mind back to Kell Brook, Sean Porter. Kell Brook was able to nullify Sean Porter. Porter was a bull in a china shop, a ball of energy, you know, a real force to be reckoned with. And Errol Spence kind of brings that, but he brings it with a lot more size, a lot more power, and fundamentally a lot more education than Sean Porter. You know, he's really precise. He's really forceful on the inside, and we saw that. However, Brook was smarter from range, and notably so. Some of the punches that Kell Brook landed on Errol Spence were real eye-catching punches. You know, Kell Brook, if you rewatch that fight, he had real moments of success in that fight. Obviously, straight punches. I saw him throwing a lead right cross that was connecting on several occasions. There's a few times you see Kell throw an uppercut up the middle, and Errol Spence has a real good chin, because at no point does Kell Brook drop Errol Spence or you know, he has Errol Spence, you know, buzzed once or twice, but at no point does he necessarily look like he's going to drop him. So my point is, it was a fight where both fighters showed considerable strengths, and that's what we like to see. Yeah, this is high-class boxing. At the time, this was the best fight in the best. But a few things I took from it. Number 1, Kell Brook was winning that fight, and he was winning that fight nicely. I had him 4-2 up. Sky had him 5-1 up. And I think after 6, he was probably winning 5 and 6, or certainly round 6. So he was not only 4-2 up, but he was 4-2 up and starting to increase his lead, you know. Now, that stopped happening from round 7 onwards. And I can't give you a clean reason as to why that happened from round 7 onwards. Was it the injury? Towards the end of the fight, you see Kell Brook's eye definitely injured. It's visible. You can see it. You can see it from the footage. Did that injury take it out of Kell Brook? Was he scared? Well, you know, he'd had a similar injury with the other eye against Gennady Golovkin, and you know, his doctor had told him about the potential for losing sight. Was it psychologically that coming back and haunting him? That's a realistic possibility, that the injury blighted Kell Brook. Was Kell Brook tired? Was the weight cut, having previously fought at middleweight, to go straight from middleweight to welterweight, was that too much? Had Kell Brook been too drained by the cut down to 147 and by expending all the energy in the early rounds? Was it Errol Spence himself? Was Errol Spence's athleticism, energy, output, and work on the inside and work to the body draining Kell Brook? Is that why Kell Brook gassed? Even in the rounds he was winning, was Errol Spence banking away enough work to really hurt and to affect Kell Brook later on in the fight? These are all realistic probabilities. And my gut instinct is there isn't a single reason why the fight turned as quickly as it did, but rather it's probably a combination of the three. Brook probably was hurting from the weight cut. Brook probably was worried about the injury. Brook probably had taken a lot of bodywork that took him out of him. And Errol Spence, to his credit, was still coming on like a steam train. He was still throwing a lot of punches and showing a lot of energy. So, for me, it's probably a combination of all of the above. However, if we say it's a combination of all of the above, then we perhaps shouldn't be so quick to write Kell Brook off. Because he's coming back at 154 initially, and one will assume that he won't be going into that fight with the eye injury, and you'd have to hope he doesn't pick up the same injury again. That would be exceptionally unfortunate if that happened. And also the weight cut will be less. So if we're saying it was a combination of all the factors, was I too quick to write Kell Brook off? Did I let Errol Spence's stoppage of Kell Brook create amnesia as to how that fight was actually looking? Could Kell Brook still be an elite level fighter if he doesn't get another injury, and if he's not draining himself and cutting down so much to get 147? I now think that that's a potential possibility. Look, Brook isn't going to get better at this stage of his career. He's now in his 30s, he's had some tough fights, he's as experienced as he's going to be. But actually, in taking rounds off Errol Spence, he showed that he's still an elite fighter. I mean, Errol Spence is one of the best fighters at a 147. He's certainly, him, Keith Thurman, I guess Terence Crawford, if you consider him 147, now he's moving up to that weight class. He's certainly in that kind of mix. He deserves to be talked alongside those sort of names. And I believe even the most ardent Errol Spence fan would say that Kell Brook was even or slightly ahead in that fight at halfway. So Kell Brook's coming off a KO loss against Gennady Golovkin. And for me, he's actually got the better of Errol Spence in the first half of the fight. And then, due to a combination of factors, he's weakened out and Errol Spence has capitalised and has stopped him in the second half of the fight. But the form that Kell Brook showed in the first half of the fight would be more than enough to beat the vast majority of fighters. I believe the form he showed was still enough to put him in the top 10 at welterweight. Look, that form is not going to beat an Errol Spence or a Keith Thurman. You need to be able to fight for 12 rounds. You need to be able to not tire, etc. if you're going to beat those guys. But could it be enough to beat a Jeff Horn? Or a Lamont Peterson? Or an Andre Berto? Or a Victor Ortiz? Or a Brandon Rios? Absolutely. Absolutely. Kell Brook still showed some elite level boxing and some real class. And any man who can take 4 rounds off Errol Spence is a man who I still think needs to be considered at the very top of the sport. Because Errol Spence, in my opinion, is an elite talent. So I'm going to give Kell Brook, in my head, another chance. I've been someone who's said in the past, I think we've seen the best of Kell Brook. I'm not sure we'll see Kell Brook on the world title scene again. I'm going to change my opinion on that. And I'm going to say that at the minute, I'm increasingly looking forward to him coming back. And based on the form that he showed in that Errol Spence fight, if he can recover from the injury, if he can maybe be an extra % or 2 better because he's not having to cut down to 147, I'm going to say that Kell Brook is still an elite level fighter who can win rounds and win fights against elite level fighters. 154 pounds will have its own challenges. The guys are going to be even bigger. Some of the guys in there are real talented fighters. Guys like Erislandi Lara, Charlo, Hurd. It's a lot of good fighters. So I'm not going to say that he walks through those guys by any stretch. But, Kell Brook is very much still in the mix, is my take. And having rewatched the fight, maybe I was guilty of writing Brook off too soon. As for Errol Spence, I think he's very good. Very good. The aggression he brings on the inside is devastating. I would personally pick him to beat Keith Thurman, I think. I do think so. I think Keith Thurman, who's another guy who's very big at 147, may struggle to deal with Errol Spence on the inside. Like Kell Brook did, Keith Thurman had a very close fight with Sean Porter that Keith Thurman, like Kell Brook, emerged victorious from. But as I've already said in this video, I think Errol Spence brings what Sean Porter does, but with a lot more power, a lot more size, and a lot more education. And I also think Errol Spence is a more versatile operator than Sean Porter. I think he can use his long levers and use his range to win rounds from distance as well, which I think Sean Porter struggles to do at the elite level. So Errol Spence, I think, is very, very good. If he were to fight Crawford, for me, that's a mouth-watering clash. You know, you have to make Crawford favourite in every fight for me right now due to the level of talent that he's displaying and the seeming lack of any weakness in his game. You know, I don't see major weaknesses in Terence Crawford. Because with Errol Spence, as good as he is, you do wonder if Kell Brook hadn't picked up that eye injury, could he maybe have snuck a points win against Errol Spence? Was he maybe en route to doing that in round 6? That's still a somewhat unanswered question for me. What I can certainly tell you is that Errol Spence, whilst he has talent from range, whilst he has schooling from distance, I don't believe he's as good a fighter from long range as he is up close. I believe he's at his most comfortable and at his most devastating on the inside. And some of those punches he was taking from Kell Brook from long distance, so that there is a bit of defensive frailty. Sometimes he can be there with limited head movement, getting caught a little bit square with punches from long range. And there are other fighters in the division who could cause him those sort of problems from distance as well. You know, he's a fighter for me who really is at his best when he can impose himself more and close down that gap. So that is something to look forward to in future Errol Spence fights. Now, Lamont Peterson, for me, he's a very versatile fighter himself. He's who Errol Spence will be facing in January. We've seen Peterson, and I like watching Peterson. We see Peterson fight a presser fighter's fight against Amir Khan. Then you see him reinvent himself against Danny Garcia and fight a back foot slickster fight. You know, this is a guy who has different hats for different occasions. And I love seeing that in a fighter. I think it's one of the most admirable qualities in a prize fighter when they can, completely adapt to their opponent, where they can change up their game plan, give you a different look. And Lamont Peterson's one of those guys. Can he come up with a look to beat Errol Spence? I'm not so sure. Peterson's very, very, very good. And he's got wins against Amir Khan. You know, he almost beat Danny Garcia. But your suspicion is when Lamont Peterson fights at the very, very, very top level, which Errol Spence does represent, he does tend to lose. And you'd also think that Lamont Peterson, who's fought a lot of his career at lower weight classes, may potentially be quite outsized by a monster at welterweight like Errol Spence. He's also not the heaviest handed guy, Lamont Peterson. It's unlikely he's going to find one punch to take Spence out. You know, Spence has shown good durability in that Brook fight. He's not an easy man to hurt and to stop. So, yeah, Peterson's got an upward battle. I mean, for me, to fight Spence, you can't do like a back foot game. I mean, like, if you imagine what Chris Algieri did to Provodnikov. Yeah, Chris Algieri fought Errol Spence. You know, you can't do that kind of running game, if you like, the back foot slickster game against Errol Spence, because I think he's so educated with his pressure and he's so aggressive coming forward and building on you. I think it's hard to get enough offense off from your back foot to really beat him and to comfortably outpoint him. I also don't know if any fighter, especially a smaller guy like Lamont Peterson, can go straight into the fire and fight him up close, you know, and come at him. I think Spence is too big, too strong, too powerful, too educated for that sort of stuff. Funnily enough, the style that Kell Brook did of sort of not backing off, you know, holding your feet a bit, but at the same time trying to keep reins, you know, trying to not go backwards the whole fight, but also trying to keep distance. That may be the best way of dealing with Errol Spence, because it allows you to keep him at distance when he's, not at his best at distance. He's at his best on the inside, as I've said. But at the same time, I think if you just back off him, back off him, back off him all night, he will just build too much momentum and be too eye-catching, walking you down. It takes a very, very special fighter with very, very special footwork to be able to stand in front of an opponent all night and keep your distance. You're looking at a Billy Joe Saunders type fighter who can do that, admittedly in different weight classes. Perhaps someone like a Terence Crawford would fight Errol Spence that way. I don't know. Can Lamont Peterson do that? I doubt it. I think Errol Spence will find a home for his work, be able to tee off on the smaller, older man. And I think Errol Spence probably wins that fight by stoppage. I know Peterson's very durable. But I'm excited to see both of these guys fight, Brook and Spence. I believe both can still represent the elite of the game. And I think Kell Brook may have more to offer on his comeback than many, including myself, initially thought after that Spence fight. Let me know your thoughts. Appreciate this has been we're now 21 minutes in. And it's me rambling about a fight that took place months ago. So, fair play to everyone who stuck with me for 21 minutes. If you have stuck with me, let me know in the comments section below. But, yeah, if you've enjoyed this content, thanks for tuning in. Please hit the thumbs up button. Please press subscribe if you haven't done so already. And leave your comments in the section below. As ever, appreciate you guys watching. Have a good one.